Hello, everyone, and welcome to Blue Mondays, the GLORIO Blogs Eureka 7 recap podcast. I, as always, am your host, Zigg, and I am joined by my trusty compadres, my foster parents on this journey. There is, of course, Aqua Gaze. Hi, Aqua, how are you doing?
It's only now that the title of this podcast is getting, appropriate, because... boy, this show has gotten depressing.
I know, right? It's fantastic. I'm also joined by G. Hello, G.
Well, don't worry, Zigg. Unlike your old, lame, busted parents, I'm treating you to weird-looking hot dog tacos every night.
Oh, yeah. And 75% less existential angst. An equal amount of murder, however.
Yeah, we're teaching you that murder is good and based, actually.
I mean, it's still a mech show. That was kind of the message all along. Anyway, this episode, we are covering episode 21, Runaway, and episode 22, Crackpot. Two episodes which follow up on some reasonably major stuff which happened over the span of the last couple of episodes. So, without further ado, let's get into it with episode 21, Runaway. Aqua, obligatory question. Any idea about the musical reference for this one?
I mean, this is the difficult one because there's so many songs called Runaway, right?
Absolutely.
The most famous one is by Kanye West, but it's obviously not named after this because that song came out after the show.
Yes.
It could be a reference to the band, the Runaways, but...
interesting, but no. This is named after a 1996 song by the garage techno electronic act Eureka Soul. I can't quite pronounce it correctly there. But interestingly, so Eureka Soul is, as with many of these musical projects, an alias for a group of two DJs, Louis Vega and Kenny Gonzalez. They put out most of their stuff under the Masters at Work name these days. But this is not a techno or garage song. This is kind of like a pop song with Puerto Rican influence. So Eureka Soul is kind of a side project which they started to explore more traditional dance pop, really. This song was off their eponymous album. This song came out in 96, but the album came out in 97. It was a big hit. It topped the dance charts on both sides of the Atlantic, and it hit number 24 on the All Formats chart in the UK. So pretty major thing.
And I'm assuming this is when the dance charts still measured what was actually being played in clubs.
Yeah, I mean the mid to late 90s. This is the golden age of club dance and stuff like that. There, it's actually a cover of a song with the same name but two words, Runaway, by the South Soul Orchestra from 1977. So, although the group are perhaps typical of many of the songs we've had on here, the song itself is not. It's pretty kicking, and I would encourage you to listen to the embed I'm going to put in there. Moving on to the episode itself, we have to start with the first and most important thing in this episode: the return of the piss bottle.
Yep. The thing we all, or at least you, right, Aqua's not watched. So the thing, Zigg, you and I collectively forgot what this was for.
Yes.
It is made its enigmatic return.
Ironically enough, Iro, who does not like this show and has only seen it once, remembered exactly what it was for, but neither you or I could remember what it was. But it turns out it's to dissolve bubblegum out of your hair and the rest of your body as well.
Yes, magic, the magic juice that just happened to be for this exact purpose. You really got to hand it to the Vodarac. They just the Vodarac works in mysterious ways.
I mean, the funny thing about Vodarac is and this is sort of a common trope in anime or anime inspired things like JRPGs, is that whenever they break out a fringe religious movement that are being treated like freaks by the main character, these people almost always end up being objectively and certifiably right about the world. It's why are you mocking these people for being religious zealots? Their rituals work.
To be fair, I'm not sure that there is a widespread need to decalcify girls, so perhaps this is not something which you can really make your name on the back of there. But
I don't know exactly like if it ever comes back, like if this is the like one and only time it actually gets used. But if this is in fact the only time the magic piss bottle gets used in Eureka 7, it's really funny because then you have to think back to like when the old lady gave it to gave it to the crew, Tip Turi, and she's like, just think like she's like, trust me, you'll need this.
As the prophecy foretold, Eureka will stumble into magic goo, and
I mean the I can't remember the priest's actual name, so I'm just going to call him Mr. X, as he was called in the last episode. But he calls her someone who has gone to the end of the 8th world. And he describes the world in which the characters live in as the 3rd world. No jokes, please; they're too obvious. But there's definitely a lot of weird mysticism around this stuff. It's almost like there's a lot of magic trappings here. You know, like they cloak it as a religious thing, but there's definitely some magic happening here.
I mean, like the concept of like various worlds existing as layers,
right,
is something you see in many religions, right? Yes. Probably like the most famous one is in like Norse mythology, or at least for us Westerners.
Yeah.
But even in like Christian cosmology, you had the idea of the different layers of existence, with Earth as the center and heaven on the very outward edges. And the depiction of Vodarac as sort of like a weird mix of like Judeo-Christian Abrahamic religions and Buddhism.
Yeah, I was going to say, I think Buddhism is the most obvious influence, and Buddhism, you know, obviously also has the idea of multiple layers of reality.
Right. So that is something like that is very clearly, like, or at least in my impression, it's very clearly supposed to be like flavor, but it's like interesting flavor that shows that actual thought was put into this, right? Because normally when you depict a fictional religion, it's like, oh, you know, the goddess or something vaguely like very much like Cliff's Notes idea of religion. Whereas here it shows that they put some actual effort into thinking about how the Vodarac look at the world and how someone who views the cosmos a certain way might phrase things completely differently from how people with a secular, let's say, point of view would say it, right?
Yeah. And, you know, the Vodarac continue to have an interesting place in this narrative because they are equal parts magical, religious, and political as well. We've mostly seen them as an analog for, you know, terrorists for the most part. So their continued existence here is one of the more interesting mysteries / parts of the world that is lurking in the background. The Mr. X here does also mention Norb again,
yes,
who has been mentioned in connection to the Vodarac. Tiptoe mentioned them briefly as well, so we don't really get any indication who or what Norb is.
Well, the way that Mr. X talks about them gives off the impression that Norb is some sort of authority figure within the Vodarac, like a spiritual leader or a guru or a pope or something like that. Yeah.
Yes, I mean, but regardless of the means and the methods, Eureka is free from her weird gummy cocoon. She is alive. She's not doing great, but she's gonna be okay.
Yeah, I mean, not without some like side effects, though, right? I mean, well, there's the hair, which is not that big of a deal, but there's also like some scarring as well.
Yeah,
right?
we actually see quite a lot of scarring. She's got it on her face. She's got it on her arms and hands and all that kind of stuff. So
this is not just a like we poured the pee bottle on you and you were magically fixed. There's But
I mean, they go pretty far in depicting Eureka's illness, right? She's pale. She talks with a very quiet voice. They even give her the like shorthand cancer patient hat.
Oh, the cancer patient hat.
Yes. Yeah.
I just conveniently happen to have on the Gekkostate, though. Yeah. I guess that's next week. But I do
think that it's important that they and it's not a spoiler to say this is how she looks going forward. Like, she will not go back to the way she used to look.
Wow.
And I think that that's important because it shows the seriousness of what's happened.
It's a nice commitment, to a change in the status quo, right? Like, we always joke about the haircut of character development, but the show's willingness to like have Eureka like altered by this event and kind of commit to it, right?
And I mean, it's not egregious. She is still very cute, just in a
oh
different
yes,
way
no.
than she was before,
it is scarring in the most
Yes,
right. But it is kind of a bold move almost to make your cute mascot poster girl, have her look pale and gaunt and scarred and have her hair chopped off. Like,
I mean, I will say that she's always pale, but
yes,
point
but
taken.
like,
I don't think she got paler,
sickly pale.
Yes,
I don't know. Yeah, maybe it's just the fact that she's not wearing her like darker blue outfit here that makes her look paler.
Yes. Also doing great, Renton.
Oh yeah. I mean, this is our classic like Renton has finally realized he's killing people moment.
Yep.
Right.
We have a delightful flashback in the form of a nightmare.
Yes.
And then the scene where he like wakes up from his PTSD nightmare, and it immediately smash cuts to like a shot of the pizza boy outfit.
Yes.
And the cover of Ray Out with him as a pizza boy on it.
Right. I really like that because it's a really efficient way of communicating the idea that he feels betrayed, not by the hazing, but by the fact that all these people were playing games with him when actually, they were all, in his mind at least, ruthless killers who were fighting a war. He can't stand to think about the happier times because they're so overshadowed by the stuff that's happened since.
Yeah, I think it's a very effective way to communicate the loss of innocence kind of moment here, right? Like we are long removed from the delightful days of hazing Renton and weird pranks, right? Like, and I mean, obviously we're talking about like Renton's reaction to this, but I do think it's also very like worth pointing out that as they kind of joke with Holland's second adolescence in the second of these two episodes, right? Holland is also in some ways lashing out, right? Because he's given advice by Mr. X, I guess, that you should keep away like whatever caused like this change in Eureka, away from her, right? And Holland naturally, naturally takes as an opportunity to be like, it's clearly Renton. Renton did this to her. We got to keep Renton away from her. And you can tell that, like, the rest of the Gekkostate crew call him out on him. They're like, you're jumping to an awfully convenient conclusion here.
I mean, we get another good example of the classic dichotomy that we already have established, which is Holland is kind of like the very irresponsible knee-jerk reaction, and Talho is the one who actually calls out his responsibility, that he has a responsibility to Renton. She says Diane's name, even though notably previously some of the other crew would not say that. So it's just another reminder that, Talho basically works as an external source of Holland's conscience and responsibility, really.
It's noticeable how quickly Holland has gone from being the unquestionable authority within Gekkostate to basically this petulant child that everyone has to like run circles around.
It does seem to have undermined his authority to a fairly major extent, it must be said.
It just shows that like guys who were previously more like laid back, like Matthew or even Hap, are, stepping up to the plate to cover for him, right? Matthew is the one who goes to talk to Renton. Hap is the one who calls out Holland, like,
in some ways, right? Because I do think like we say this, but also at the end of the day, the Gekkostate crew does still sort of defer to Holland's decision, right? They kind of talk about how Holland tells the rest of the Gekkostate crew treat Renton like normal, like nothing has changed, and it's like one of those things of like, well, whether it was malice or just like poor, unintentioned like callousness. I think it's like it's really interesting because it is like the completely incorrect read on like how to handle like what Renton is going through, because like you can kind of tell, and this becomes much more obvious in the next episode when he meets, Ray and Charles, that what Renton needs right now is like comfort.
Yes.
He needs solace. He needs somebody to like help him, like be emotionally there for him to help him work through his feelings. And instead, the Gekkostate crew is like, no, we just pretend everything's normal. Then that's what he needs.
That's the thing, right? They are all immature because they are collectively living in a kind of delusion. Like, these guys have never experienced what Renton experiences now. They are desensitized to violence because they probably grew up with it. Being soldiers, being like, they didn't have that like shock, that whiplash of the realization that Renton has, and they draw a complete blank at how to deal with it.
I mean, I'm not going to say that they never had that sort of reaction, but I think it's clear that Renton's PTSD, depression, kind of nervous breakdown, and a lot of the symptoms here are very familiar to people who have like gone through nervous breakdowns in real life. It has been exacerbated by the fact that his sort of fantasy has been couched by being in the Gekkostate, right? Like, he may have come to this realization a lot sooner if he were not giddy with Eureka and being part of the crew and all of the sort of boy's own adventure stuff that he's been wrapped up in. If he had perhaps followed a more normal path to combat, then perhaps he would have made this realization either sooner or more gradually, either of which would have softened.
Right, because to be clear, I don't think it's like, oh well, once you're an adult, you become okay with killing other people. But I think it is notable that of the people we've been shown to have that realization, like Holland was already an adult, a soldier in the military, and Eureka's own upbringing is intentionally very unconventional, right?
Yes. And still unclear to us. The other thing I will say is that this reaction by Renton is very self-absorbed. Like, it's a very like worries me reaction, but in a reasonable and understandable way. He is shell-shocked, and I think that this is the question of maturity and responsibility. I think a more mature, more responsible person would be able to subsume some of their trauma by focusing on the other problems that are out there, perhaps by paying more attention to Eureka or the other things that are happening. Renton can't do that because as a child, he finds it very difficult to control his emotions in that way, right? I don't think, when I say he's very self-absorbed, I don't mean it makes him unsympathetic. I just mean that he is very obviously incapable of big picturing the whole thing.
Right. I mean, you kind of get that in, the conversation he has with Matthew, right? Where Matthew decides to be the one who kind of breaches the firmament here, right? And also shout outs to the like very excellent sequence. Like, this is like what animation can do so well, which is like the usage of repetition, right? Where we keep having opening the bag of chips and like just cramming it. It's perfect, right? It's such a good way to communicate.
I mean, the thing is, like,
state.
It's a really excellent use of like recycling the same animation loop again.
I'm not kidding if I'm saying this is one of the most like haunting things I have ever seen in a shonen anime. Like, okay, like this is a thing that happens a lot. The character does a thing that changes their world and they're traumatized, but he's just straight up binge eating.
Yes.
Like that is a territory where anime usually does not go.
Yeah, I mean,
because it is so raw and real, and you can't like sensationalize any aspect of it.
I think, like I said, that it is a very good representation of what depressive funk or trauma can be like. Because he is operating, but there is clearly nobody at home behind the eyes.
Right. It's such a like. In some ways, it reminds me a lot of like these. The moment I have on a t-shirt, the iconic moment where like Amuro is so haunted by piloting the Gundam, his eyes go white, right? Like, which is like very dramatic, right? It's very, it's very Tomino, right? But in many ways, like I think Renton's binge eating is kind of is like a more modern, maybe more believable, like relatable,
a little more understated, perhaps,
right? Take on the same sort of like like just sort of shell-shocked realization.
Yeah.
But
And I think this conversation with Mathieu is a really good scene and really strong, because it shows that if we take Mathieu as a proxy for the crew as a whole, minus Holland, let's say, it shows that they are not unsympathetic, but also they are just not capable of reaching out in the way that Renton requires, right? Like, you know,
The interesting thing is that Macho isn't necessarily right here. Like, at least what he says is in a way also immature, right? Because he says, "Oh, that's just how the world works. We're survivors. We gotta fight to survive." It's
he's trying to do the tough love thing. Right?
Yeah,
and this is why I really think it's really notable that in many ways what Gekkostate so desperately needs is like an actual adult. Right, or I guess an actual adult who's willing. Here, it's the weird thing of like Gekkostate actually has a number of like mature adults on the crew.
Like
you have Dr.
Misha,
Misha, you have Kengo, but like they're not adults who are willing to like parent, if that makes sense. At least not in that way.
I mean, the thing is also Holland seems like the guy who won't take authority from anyone who is not, his girlfriend. And even there, it's...
I mean, I feel like you can broadly divide the Gekkostate crew into, like, people who are believers in the lifestyle and people who are there as working professionals. So, like, Misha, Jobs, Kengo, for example, those people are there because their expertise is required and they are doing a job which they are being compensated for. Like the frontline crew, the pilots and stuff like that, they're more kind of here as representatives of the lifestyle / political mission ethos stuff.
And
they're the band, and then there's the crew that makes sure that the band gets everywhere on time.
And that's what I think is really interesting, because like exactly, it's like Mathieu is again an adult, but he is not like, in some ways he is like barely an adult, right? Like when we talk about like the band, as you said, Aqua, these are guys who are like, at least they read to me as like at the latest mid to late 20s.
Yeah.
Right?
Oh yeah,
like,
yeah.
In some ways, not even like adults in like the way that Renton needs one, and so I think it's fitting that their advice, or at least Matthew's advice, or not even advice really, but like admonishment, like is simply not the right tact for a child, right? Like in some ways, the like get yourself together, man thing is like that's the advice you would give to someone your own age, right? Like, that's something...
And Mathieu is trying to speak to Renton as an equal rather than a parental figure, which is good in theory, but not.
But in this moment,
moment,
and I think this is what kind of sends Renton deeper into the spiral in this episode, right?
Absolutely.
Because it's essentially the equivalent of, they're bullying you just bully them back. Like,
yeah, I mean, it's not. And again, I kind of feel like I need to emphasize he's trying. Mathieu is at least taking a step that the rest of the crew haven't, which is to try and reach out to Renton and sort of communicate with him on the level. So it's not malicious. It's just that he is not able to offer the kind of emotional safeguard that Renton requires at this point. Because, as you say, Aqua, he himself is kind of still a child, or at least immature in the sense of emotional intelligence. There. Let's move on a little. I do think that the children standing makeshift guard outside Eureka's room is extremely adorable.
It is some much needed levity, right?
Yeah,
in
absolutely.
This quagmire of depression.
We do find out that they have turned on Renton because Holland told them he was at fault for...
Right, which is in some ways...
kind of a really shitty thing to do.
Yeah, exactly. And I don't blame the children because, again, they are actual children. Yeah. Like, I mean, they won't believe whatever an adult figure tells them. But in some ways, it does show, like, all the myriad ways in which the Gekkostate has, like, completely mishandled this situation, right? Like, whether it's healthy or not, I think the subtext you can read in this episode is like Renton and Eureka so desperately just want to see each other.
Yes.
Right? Like that is the thing that is like keeping them going on the Gekkostate.
Yeah.
And so the fact that
I do think Renton's distraction to move the children away very cute. as well.
Yes.
Oh yes, with the mouse.
About chasing this mechanical mouse like they're
It's very
kittens
good.
or something.
Yeah, it's very good.
I mean, he's the guy who runs who takes on all the Amazon packages that Gekkostate gets, so he could have ordered that.
But yes, I mean, like this scene with Renton and Eureka finally meeting each other again is kind of the emotional core of this episode, at least there, and it's I think it's awkward and difficult in the right way to propel this story forward, right? Like Renton is reaching out to Eureka because he wants emotional comfort, but she can't provide that because one, she doesn't know how emotions work, and two, she almost literally died, and Misha was not joking about the fact that she probably shouldn't see anybody. So there's just kind of a mixture of misunderstanding and miscommunication here, right?
I think so, right? Like they are once again kind of talking past each other, right? Like they both clearly care for each other deeply, but like what each of them sort of needs emotionally is like still not exactly lined up, and so what they say to each other doesn't like they don't quite meet in the middle, right?
And the thing is, like, Eureka says some stuff here which is pretty cruel, but also she has no context for what has happened while she was gummy bearified.
Right. She doesn't know what Renton's gone through.
And also remember, like, the thing we know about Eureka is that she is a soldier who has killed countless people before.
Right.
And so, like, she just kind of thinks he's naive for not realizing he was killing people all along. And that's...
which I kind of, like... I understand. I think the angle of... Oh, we were actually killing people all along? I'm not sure if that was the right angle to go with. I understand it in the context of, shattering Renton's idea of what Gekkostate is. But I think that is an idea that has been building up for a very long time, and I think it might show him as just a little bit too naive, and maybe not even necessary, because, like, he did, like, there is enough reason for him to be traumatized already by the sheer facts of what happened.
I think my generous read on it is, like, everybody's... Every Gundam-inspired mecha anime will be somebody's first exposure to these ideas, right?
It's also like there's a possibility that he is using this as his smokescreen, right? This is his way to cope with the grief, is to instead of grieving about the fact that he murdered people, he is instead channeling that into rage and disillusionment at the Gekkostate.
I mean, I think it's a combination of all of these things, right? I think it's important to emphasize, I don't think the show is literally saying that Renton didn't realize he was killing people. No. Like, it is, as the last episode made very clear, it is the difference between knowing that intellectually and knowing it viscerally, right? Like, the thing he realized is that he is taking lives in a very real and messy manner.
These were not NPCs.
Yeah, so like when he says, "I didn't know we were killing people," it's metaphorical, obviously. Of course he knew, but he didn't think, it's more that the reality of war has come in on him. Obviously, his projection of this onto the rest of the Gekkostate is a coping mechanism, because of course they knew they were killing people. In some senses, they want to kill people, right? They are anti-government rebels. Killing people is part of the job to a certain
They encouraged it, like in a way they desensitized him.
I mean, in a way that is what they are here to do, right?
Yeah,
they are fighting against the system. So yes, absolutely, he's projecting outwards there, but it's an understandable expression of his grief, right? He feels betrayed because they did not communicate the seriousness of the situation to him, but that's not something that can be communicated, right? He's asking for the impossible. Especially
because the idea that Gekkostate are righteous rebels has already been scattered a couple of episodes ago, right? When he has slowly realized that, these guys are not like cool rebels, they're kind of just shitty mercenaries who think they're above the law, but they're not really doing and making an actual effort to make the world a better place.
Yeah. I mean, the other thing I want to note about this scene is that in some ways, this is a very sympathetic, heartfelt thing. Renton cares about Eureka a great deal. He wants to see her. But it's also kind of a selfish thing. He wants her to comfort him, and she really does need to rest. She really shouldn't be seeing people at this point. There's that great line when he first appears where she says, "Oh, Misha was right. It is bad for me to see you. My heart is speeding up." And that's really cute, but there's kind of a point there as well, So, and I think because this desire is based on that selfishness, because he came here primarily for comfort, when she cannot offer that, that is the straw which breaks the camel's back, right?
And this is kind of the story of Renton's life, right? Whenever he does anything, he basically does everything he does for selfish reasons. But
to a certain extent.
That's not a criticism. That is just what teenage boys are like. And in a way, it is not inherently wrong to do the right thing for a selfish reason, because
you can have multiple motivations.
Right. That's the thing. You can have the personal benefit as a nice bonus, but I think it is a nice sort of dramatic irony that this is the straw that breaks the camel's back, right?
Right, and it's very clearly intended to signal, the thing that was keeping him here, despite all the stuff he has gone through, was his affection for Eureka. Now, in his mind, that is gone. There is no reason to stay, and the next thing he does is leave.
Yeah, he steals Moondoggy's backpack.
Yep, he steals Moondoggy's backpack. He runs into Gonzi, who apparently just camps near the emergency escape hatch all the time. And
he camps wherever he wants, because later on he shows up behind Talho, and he has his entire campsite there.
Yeah, he Batman's it.
Just Batman, yeah.
But yes,
of course, Renton making the mistake. Obviously, Amuro was smart enough when he left the White Base. He remembered to take the Gundam with him. Maybe in some ways this shows how depressed Renton is. He's so depressed he isn't even willing to steal the Nervash while he leaves the Gekkostate.
I mean, they kind of acknowledge that, right? Because when he leaves, he goes "Oh, the Yamata drive. Oh no, wait, it doesn't matter."
Yeah, I saw that as how far he is really gone.
I am mostly joking. It's just that I think it's very funny because I think in many ways this is meant to mirror that a sort of iconic story beat in Mobile Suit Gundam when Amuro abandons the White Base, and he still has the wherewithal to take the Gundam with him, which in some ways really fucks over the White Base crew.
Yeah. And also, it's kind of like taking the bomb with you, right?
Yeah.
If you're running to escape the horror of war, you probably shouldn't take the super advanced weapon you've been killing people with away with you.
Yes, but in contrast,
you know what they say: if it sucks, hit the bricks. But you really do have to hit the bricks.
Well,
you gotta cut everything loose.
Yes,
just make sure to take a parachute.
Yes, I started this bit as a joke, but I actually do think it is an interesting contrast, right? Because in some ways, Amuro, when he leaves and takes the Gundam with him, there is still an empowering aspect of he still has the Gundam. He still has the means with which to inflict harm with. Whereas Renton gives it all up, right? He gives up, in some ways, in the context of a mecha anime, he gives up his agency, right?
Because it doesn't matter.
He leaves the robot behind.
The Nervash represents his bond with Eureka. That is the reason why he pilots the Nervash. Or at least that's why he thinks that's the reason. Because, he enjoys personal enjoyment of piloting as well, as we saw in the very second episode.
Well, that's kind of what I was getting at. Is because we've seen that Renton piloting the Nervash is in some ways meant to represent his actualization, right? Like when he gets better at it, when he gets more confident at it. And I bring it up because specifically in the context of the second of these two episodes, we really see what happens to Renton once he loses his sort of meta textual agency, right?
Yes.
Like what can he do without the Nervash? What he can do is
nothing.
Nothing.
He could suck.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. I mean, I think I also want to highlight the incredibly strong imagery here. I think the shot of Renton just stepping through the hatch and falling through the sky is incredibly strong, and you don't get that if he takes the robot. Obviously, I think
definitely not.
I think the dialogue is great. What is it? What does he say? The sky I leapt into seemed all warped because of my tears. Is just a really great line there. But moving along, as we see Renton leave the Gekkostate, we're introduced to some new characters.
A new duo.
Yes, indeed. We are introduced to the pizza-loving Charles and the flighty... the
bell-bottom wearing
yes.
Ray.
These two are very 60s coded. The flowery shirts, the bell-bottoms, all of that stuff. But yes.
I mean, look... their names, right? Ray and Charles.
I mean, everything's a musical reference, obviously, but there's also some important world building stuff that's done here, although it's a little in the background. It's established that there are other pirates, rebel groups, rogue LFO users.
Right. All of a sudden, there's pirates. Which makes sense, I guess.
They've alluded to stuff in previous episodes that there are other groups out there.
Right.
If you see the skies as kind of like a rough analog to the Age of Sail, which it kind of is, then obviously, you would have pirates, freelancers, which is what Ray and Charles are.
Right.
They made it, they implied the existence of bounty hunting as a profession, right? Because obviously that's how they found Tiptori all those episodes ago. So, but yeah, the introduction of Ray. Sorry, go ahead.
No, I also wanted to add that the military is very obviously British Navy during the Age of Sail coded, right?
They're a force which theoretically controls the world, but has trouble enforcing every last.
They rule the waves.
There is still room in the sky, as there was on the sea, to live free of laws.
Right. I do love this introduction of Ray and Charles, right? The LFOs they pilot, their style of piloting. Yes. It's such a, if you're going to introduce your, I'm not going to say where, this arc goes with Ray and Charles, but if you're going to introduce, your next major set of, mecha pilots, this is a very fun dynamic, right?
I mean, you immediately get the vibe from them, they're fun, they're breezy, they do everything together, they enjoy toying with their enemies,
right? They have a red and blue, same, a duo. They ride a board together.
Yeah, they like making Charles counterattack references,
but they also have
the board is just for show.
Very loose morals, right?
Yes.
I think it's very nicely shown in the back half of this episode that, like you say, they like toying with their enemies. They have a very flashy fighting style where they're just but also take pleasure in doing the cockpit shot in the most brazen way possible.
They bust that cockpit open. They steal from their supposed employer.
Yes. Well, and it was Ray and Charles are a sort of delightful contrast to the Gekkostate, right? In some ways, this is what the other side of the coin looks like, right? These are people who are in it for themselves, purely for their material gain. But in some ways, as we will see with the next episode, that does not make them, it does not make them monsters inherently, right?
No. And they clearly have a very deep affection and connection to each other, right?
Yeah, and I love the sequence. Look, I got to talk about the mech stuff, right? Ray's mech with the weird eye lasers. Charles with the freaking arm blades. The sequence where he's just in first person, just going ka-chunk, ka-chunk, ka-chunk through the ship is his mech having a pile bunker horn just for going through cockpits is so
these mechs are so cool. I have toys of them. The spearheads, they're called.
And
I have toys of
gimmick,
these things.
Nice. I love them, right? Their gimmick of they don't need a board to fly. It's such a good way to set up your...
In fact, there's a good variety of mech designs we see throughout these two episodes, actually, because we see the weird sort of more industrialized mech. Some of the pirate
shit boxes
as well.
Yes, a good shit box.
But yes, we also get a brief cut to Anemone and Dominic, who are still doing great together.
Evil woman spotted. Sound the alarm.
Yes,
that's why I'm here this week.
I mean, I think though that what's especially notable here is that last time we saw Anemone, she was like crying and screaming and puking and all like, I don't want to pilot, I don't want to go out. And now she's crying and screaming and puking and like, I want to go out, I want to go out.
Yes.
So she has done a full 180 in the time since we've last seen them.
I do love how Dominic has found out the way to deal with her, which is to say, well, Dewey said so. Dewey told me to do this, and then she just goes, all right,
she just goes gooey instantly. The moment Dewey is mentioned. But we also get another quick mention of the Ageha project.
Yes, Project Butterfly.
But yes, I mean the Dominic and Anemone stuff is mostly to lead us into Charles and Ray meeting Dewey there.
Yes,
where it is clear that they have history, right? Like Dewey says, "This is how you've always been" to Charles, and Charles talks about how he used to be in the military.
Yeah, and more importantly, right, is that Charles and Ray are essentially being hired to take out Gekkostate. Right.
They're being used as a PMC, basically.
Yes, basically.
Yeah.
I mean, and the fact that Charles has beef with Holland also sort of shows how similar these characters are. You know, they both are kind of like mentor figures for Renton. They're both ex-military. They don't want to go back, but they have animosity between them. And it sort of sets up Ray and Charles as like, not necessarily a dark mirror to Gekkostate.
They are a shadow of Gekkostate.
Yeah,
right?
But they are like, the thing is like, if the Vodarac are like the super example of like, oh, this is how you properly rebel against society, then Ray and Charles are like the opposite of that. You know, that's just, oh, you make use of this opportunity, you make use of the chaos to live only for yourself.
I mean, in many ways, Ray and Charles are the purest expression of the 60s counterculture vibe, right? They are unashamedly, you know, hedonists who live for the moment.
I was literally about to say.
They are the id. They are the id if the Vodarac are like the super ego telling you what correct and moral behavior is. And all of Gekkostate are sort of torn between these two.
Yeah.
Like leading examples.
They're not quite sense freaks, but they are very clearly people who indulge in like the pleasures of the flesh, which includes killing people, obviously.
Yes. And I think, but at the same time, right, it is like, I think it's such an interesting dynamic. I mean, maybe we just get into it with like this next episode, right? Because like,
it's something we'll talk about more in that next episode.
I really love Ray and Charles' characters. I think that their introduction is like, to me, like if you ask me like what is like the single most like important arc in Eureka 7 for me, in some ways, it is Ray and Charles.
It's
right?
Up here.
And it is specifically Ray and Charles meeting Renton. I think it's like it's such a like in many ways, right? It's like Ray and Charles make for such interesting rivals, antagonists, you know, counterparts to the Gekkostate, right? Because of like, and all the ways in which, like, even here you can begin to see like the ways in which, as you said, they are a dark reflection of the Gekkostate, but also in the ways in which their like hedonist freewheeling lifestyle like enables them to like be emotionally open, especially to Renton, in ways that Gekkostate never could.
That is something that we'll get into in the next episode, I think. But let's clear up some of the.
Sorry, can I say one more thing about Ray and Charles? Because I think it's sort of interesting how like they are basically Timon and Pumbaa from The Lion King. Like
that's a comparison. All right.
No, I mean they are.
No, I know what he's saying.
Yeah, the main character has run away from his responsibility, and he encounters these two hedonists who like teach him life lessons that are like inherently kind of okay, but also not really what the character needs at the moment.
Timon and Pumbaa didn't kill people.
No, but money. Like, I mean, they're like the G-rated version of that.
Yes, I know exactly what you mean. But what I'm saying is the Lion King should have introduced Timon and Pumbaa.
Yes,
like killing a hyena before they meet Simba.
What if Timon and Pumbaa had mechs?
Yeah, exactly.
Look, I need to correct you. As far as we know, Timon and Pumbaa never killed anyone.
Waiting for the prequel.
You're right. Timon and Pumbaa cannot be prosecuted in this state. The statute of limitations declare that.
That's the title of the episode.
Let's clean up a little of the back half of this episode, though. One thing I did want to point out is that at the end of this scene, Charles quotes the thing which Renton is always saying that he learned from his sister. Don't ask for it. I can't remember the whole thing, but you know what I mean. That phrase, which clearly means that though, like Charles has been in sort of the loop of the Thurston family, Holland, Diane, Adrock. He was part of this loop that we're learning goes out there. A couple of things towards the end of this here. I really like the children playing with the mouse. I think that's really cute.
Yes,
hey, they caught it. That's their reward.
Yes. People who are not aware might think that Misha measuring Eureka's temperature by sticking something in her ear is very sci-fi, but it's not. Ear thermometers are a fairly common thing.
Yep.
Oh, yeah.
Also, I think that there's an interesting thing here, which is that Eureka clearly expected Renton to come back and apologize and make up with her, right?
Yes.
And at the same time, she's savvy enough to not reveal directly that he visited her. Right, she just asks, "Is he coming?" And they kind of dodge the question there.
Also, a good bit where once again, Talho is berating Holland for being a child. Basically, saying what we've all known, right? Which is like you need to get over yourself and recognize the feelings those two have for each other.
Yeah, and she cuts straight to the heart of the matter, which is that they were both trying to save Eureka. They are united by a common cause, something which Holland doesn't want to admit, but clearly is the heart of the matter here. But
also, we find out that apparently the backpack that Renton ran off with was Moon Doggy's.
Which explains why there was a bra in it.
Yeah, old Doggy Nissan just can't catch a break.
Yeah, just an endless parade of humiliation.
His favorite backpack. He's really sad about it. He's really.
Yeah, he's just so pathetic. I can't help but want to take care of him.
We'll get there.
Okay, with that, let's move on to episode 22, Crackpot. Not too much musical history behind this name. It's named after the track called Crackpot, although it's spelt with K-R-A-K in the track, by the techno-musical act Plastic Man. The interesting thing here is that Plastic Man is just another alias for Richie Hawtin, who also, you may recall from episode 20, did the song Substance Abuse under his Fuse alias. You're going to see this, a few times as we go forward, because electronic music is just kind of the thing where artists have multiple aliases for the different kinds of music they want to put out.
It's just the same 5 guys doing everything.
Kind of. So I would say that's the most interesting thing about this release.
Well, hey, substance abuse, crackpot, guys got a style.
Look, it was the mid-90s. Everybody had that style.
Is crack an electronic drug?
I do not profess
people
to know.
People who are into techno take pills.
Again, I will point out it was spelt with a K in the song, but also I do not profess to know the vernacular of the mid-90s club scene. I was in my mid-preteens at that point, so I was not going out to many clubs in the mid-90s. We opened this episode with a fun little bit between Talho and Hilda, right? They kind of have a little...
Yes.
Not Gidget. That's the thing.
Yeah, right? Most importantly, not Gidget, right? Gidget is not part of is not in on the joke, right? Which I actually really like as a little bit a sequence, right? And it does set up obviously the later conversation in this episode of the
stuff with the Eureka.
Yeah, Gidget is just generationally different from Talho enough that they don't really gel together, right? It's an interesting little thing.
The thing is, when you're in your early 20s, Talho is... Nothing is more cringe than someone who is in their late teens,
that's fair, I will say. Yes. There is a little bit of foreshadowing here where Talho mentions that the cloud pattern foretells tectonic shifts, and the tectonic shift does indeed play a fairly significant part in the later part of this episode. But we also do get a rather lovely scene where the children get to see Eureka again, and it's very.
I do like their sequence of what they have brought. Right,
yes.
like
can you remember what they brought?
I can't remember their names, but I remember what they brought. Okay. Right,
like, Mater bought a flower. Link bought a drawing, and Maurice bought paper cranes.
Yeah, and the
like 100 of them.
Yeah, the 100 paper cranes combined with Eureka sitting there with the cancer patient hat. That is like,
yeah.
I'm not sure what you're implying here, but I'm not sure if it's appropriate.
I mean, like the paper cranes are like a universal Japanese symbol for ill people, right? So it's just
very.
I just think that they are nice reflections of the children's level of maturity.
Exactly.
Right?
Yes.
Right there.
Yes.
Another nice little bit here, I think that's good, is that Misha casually reveals that she totally knows that Renton came in to see Eureka. They just don't want to tell her that he's not here yet. In fact, there's a little kind of running theme here about what they should do about Renton disappearing. Suffice to say that they're not as alarmed or distressed as one might hope.
Not particularly, right? I mean, Hilda, like, again, and this is the ways in which, like, parts of the Gekkostate do feel like adults, right? Like, it's almost like you had to, like, conspicuously not have Hilda involved in the previous episode, because, like, Hilda is, like, the person on the Gekkostate with, like, who maybe could have had the emotional maturity to handle someone like Renton. Yeah. So conveniently not on screen in episode 21.
I mean, but that's the advantage of your ensemble cast, right? Is that you can cycle them in and out when you need them. I think this is a really good chat between Misha and Hilda here. Right, there's definitely some women are wiser stuff here.
Right. I mean Hilda has a great line. Oh, go ahead.
That line of like, "You're 1 year older than me, so you know way more about how to be a mother," is the most like women be shopping line I have heard out of the show in a long time.
That was from the earlier chat between Talho and Hilda.
Yeah.
But
I choose to interpret that more as like that's like Hilda is one of the few people Talho can actually be girlies with, right? Fun, on this crew. I mean, but Hilda's saying, Renton left a note. He said, "Please don't look for me," which means he totally wants us to look for him.
I mean, that is the most accurate thing anybody has said in this show in ages, right? Like, it's just like, we are not even going to bother showing the thought process. We just immediately realize the bullshit that he's on here, right?
And that, of course, that he is not the only person on the Gekkostate who is maybe in a rebellious adolescent phase at the moment.
Yes. Just a nice scene that acknowledges that at least some of the more introspective members of the Gekkostate do understand the situation that they are in a little better than it appears here. But after that, we get a little bit of Renton here, and I really like these scenes because it's some wordless visual storytelling, some nice music, some really great storytelling through visuals, right? I think we get a lot more of the there's the thing I've written here is like there's a lot of Dust Bowl imagery here, right? Kind of like a blasted land. More again of the theme of like this world is dying, right? It is abandoned, it is ruined.
It's also very symbolic, Renton escapes the place where he doesn't want to be anymore. He looks up at the sky, like thinks back of the freedom it once represented that now feels very limiting. And then he realizes that he's in no man's land. Like, there is nothing for him here either.
It's a good... They convey isolation very well here, by framing him very small in the shot, by framing him against these scenes of ruin and natural kind of landscapes. He's made to feel very lonely, very, very apart.
But there is also something almost like kind of weirdly like melancholy, appealing in its melancholy, I guess. Like, I think, I think like if you have ever been a rebellious teen, there is almost something like alluring about this sequence, right? Of like, what if I could just leave it all behind, right? Like what if I could just get on my board or get on my car or bike or whatever and just like drive pick a direction and just like never look back, right? And
there's a romance to the strange wanderer alone in the landscape, right?
Which then kind of makes it. Oh, go ahead.
I was going to say they should have called this episode "Teenage Wasteland."
Well, a little on the nose,
a little too on the nose. But and I think this actually does a good job because like that alluring melancholy then runs into the hard reality of like the moment. Renton actually does make it to a city. He is immediately robbed his first night.
I really like this scene. I think it's really finely balanced because the thing is, we get the tramp stealing his stuff, right? And then we get an insight into how tortured he is, and the tramp, while he's stealing it, hears him speak, sees the photo and stuff. And he's like, I'm sorry, kid. But he still steals the stuff.
He still takes it, right?
Yeah,
like that's.
But he leaves the photo, and I think the thing there, I think the thing there is that it's a good balance between mushy sentimentality and kind of like hard practicality. There, the dude clearly feels that he knows he's doing something bad, but he still does it because of necessity, right? And
I mean, like we get. I mean, I think it all kind of like works as a whole, right? Because again, the world in Wasteland, right? The idea the world is dying, that like things are on a downturn. Renton finding like the other homeless, right? Like later in the episode, right? Like there is this sense that like this is not a flourishing world.
Yeah, and so there's some cultural context here as well. Homelessness is a big deal in Japanese society, right? The homelessness are looked down on. They are hidden. They are.
Well, I would go as far as say that's not. I don't think that's necessarily unique to Japan, unfortunately.
Okay, sure. Right? Yeah. But like the idea that perhaps the idea that they are hidden away and kind of like kept out of sight is perhaps more pronounced there than it would be in the West. And yes, Renton finds himself among gangs of mostly men who are on the streets, struggling to survive.
I think it's also interesting to see that sort of shows that maybe Matthew was right. Maybe it is a dog-eat-dog world out there. And what happens to Renton here, the fact that he gets robbed by this tramp who acknowledges that, he also has to survive, maybe proves that Matthew's desensitization to this world where it's a struggle to survive is in a certain way justified, right?
I mean, certainly this episode is designed to be kind of like Renton once again being dunked into the harsh reality of the world, as opposed to kind of like he's still extant dreams of brotherhood and not glory, but like hanging loose with his friends, so to speak. It's another cold bucket of water poured on him.
All right, now that's all well and good, but again, we have important things to talk about here, like the stark reveal that Hap is a naked shitter.
Yep. Another important scene set in a toilet. It just keeps coming around again there.
I've heard of this. I have heard tell that there are people out there like this who like must strip completely nude to take a crap, but I completely forgot this was in Eureka 7. I completely forgot this detail about Hap.
See, I'm the exact opposite. This is the scene I remember. This is the scene I remember from this show that made me remember that a whole bunch of conversations take place in bathrooms. Because this one is just so bizarre that they're discussing this incredibly emotional, important thing while Holland is also going to the bathroom. By the way, he's pissing, and
the Gekkostate are so used to having meaningful conversations on the toilet that Hap recognizes that it's Holland simply based on the sound of his
piss. Yeah. It's like this. There are other men on the Gekkostate. Like, you're sitting in a stall. Like, how could you like so confidently know? That's that stream. Oh, that's the sound of Holland, all right. But in some ways, it is a delightful. This is a very I would not say dude's rock, but a very dude-coded mirror to Talho and Hilda's conversation at the start of the episode, right?
It's definitely Hilda meant to be a counterpart, right?
Yeah, like Hilda and Talho are being the girlies. Meanwhile, like Hap is like shitting naked and like, hey man, I'm sorry, sometimes childhood friends go a little too far, but...
Yeah, we should mention he's also reading the paper on the throne as well.
Yeah, and he neatly folded all of his clothes.
Yeah, it's
weird.
Oh, man.
We do learn a few things here. We do learn that Hap and Holland were childhood friends.
Yes.
Hap does mention, doesn't it feel like history is repeating itself, which suggests that perhaps Holland also not a great kid either, honestly.
Yes. Surprising no one.
Yes, but we have to go from there to perhaps the most bizarre, out of left field, unbelievable thing that has yet happened in this show. There's a rave in the middle of the day.
Yeah, and it's like an actual rave. Like it's like an actual rave in that the music is like the kind of like boring, repetitive techno they would play at actual raves. There's like 5 people and they're all weird junkies doing their own thing.
Oh my god, the background characters in this sequence, it's so like, it's such a, like, this show was made like 2006, 4, whatever, like it's just, these characters are just so stereotypically like, vaguely junky, like coded ravers, just
party people,
dude with like wearing 3D glasses while smoking a blunt.
Renton gradually like waking up, smiling, and then getting into this extremely daffy headbanging.
Yeah,
it's so good.
It's one of the most moe things I've ever seen.
His weak little like fist pump, as he's listening to the music. I
just want to hug him. It's so pathetic.
Of course, and then it's especially funnier because then you find out that Charles is doing the same stupid fist pump in front of the subwoofer.
That shot where he's in the background and Renton is in the foreground is great.
Have you ever been to like a party? This is just how people dance.
Oh,
this is the mating ritual of the white person. I guess they're not white, but
it's very weird.
That random guy who's just like yo to Charles, and Charles like yo back or something.
It gives him the finger guns.
Yeah, they use English.
Oh man,
it's a really interesting way to introduce these two characters to each other, and there's a whole bunch of stuff in this scene I really like as well. I think that Charles and Renton having an immediate sort of camaraderie works really well. Because
totally.
Charles is just kind of a really charismatic character, right? Like,
he is, yeah.
Worth pointing out, when he mentions that Renton is on a sentimental journey, that is, of course, another music reference. Sentimental Journey, a very famous 1940s standard by Doris Day. But he's just... The thing I have written here is that in this scene, Charles so effectively embodies the easygoing, friendly, boisterous masculinity that Renton really wants to look up to, right? He represents...
That's the thing, right?
He represents a completely different form of masculinity, of... what's the word? Just sort of broiness that nobody on the Gekkostate can match.
Charles is what Renton wants Holland to be. Like,
yes, exactly. And I love it because like it doesn't feel like malicious or manipulative. Like this is just who Charles is.
Yeah.
And like it's just the perfect person to like walk into Renton's life at this juncture, right?
Yeah.
Like he is the platonic, masculine, patriarchal figure for Renton.
There is massive cool uncle energy coming off of him in the most complimentary possible way.
Yes.
He's not necessarily talking to Renton as an equal. He's still talking to him as a child, but in that very easygoing way that is not patronizing or condescending.
And it's really important because there is that line later in the episode, right, where Charles and Ray are like, you're a kid. Like, be a kid. Don't be afraid to grow up. Like, don't try to grow up too fast, right? Like,
there's just kind of like there's almost a himbo-ish energy coming off of him
Yes.
in this scene. He is just extremely likable. Just the whole, hey, do you see that hot chick over there? That's my wife. He's just so daffy, and
Charles is like, yes, the rare but highly appreciated anime wife guy. Right there with like my Hughes.
He says my wife.
Yeah, he says my wife.
But like, it's so easy. Like, this scene is so good because it is so easy to see why, after being stuck with these complicated, moody assholes, Renton would be drawn to this charismatic, handsome, tall, friendly man. Right? Like, he is such an obvious attractive, not in the romantic sense, but a figure of attraction for a boy of Renton's age in his mindset. He is the cool big brother. He is the cool uncle. He really has that energy, and they do so well at conveying that as well. This scene is briefly interrupted by giant broccoli bursting out of the ground.
As was hinted at the start of the episode, right?
Yes.
The giant broccoli has been a thing since episode 1, right? I remember distinctly writing giant broccoli ? In my notes for episode 1.
But so this is the first time we've seen that it is an active threat. Like that it is
one of the many active environmental threats in this universe.
But we see it actively laying waste to this entire area, and it's clearly a phenomenon that people know because people talk about tectonic activity. We've actually had quite a few offhand mentions of tectonic activity throughout the various episodes, but it's clear that this is one of the problems that this world faces.
Right. Yeah. And that's kind of like, and this earthquake is basically how Renton gets formally introduced to Ray and Charles, right, and kind of gets taken in by them. But
a good little touch here is that they don't have Charles save Renton from being skewered. They have Ray save him, which immediately puts her on an equal level with Charles, and also gives sort of like an immediate connection between Renton
immediately
and Ray
starts to position her already kind of maternally, right?
Right, yes, as a protective mother figure,
and makes it a proper way to introduce her aside from Charles being like, "That's my wife."
That's that hot lady. That babe is my wife. I guess it's and you know what? I got to fit this segment in somewhere, so you know what, Charles, you got great taste in women. Let me just say, Ray is maybe one of my favorite character designs in this show.
Pretty lady wears bell bottoms, kills people, ticks all the boxes.
Look, before Shiko Sugai. There was Ray Beams, right? So, yes. God, is that why she has that last name? Is that why Charles' last name is Beams? Charles Beams. So that her full name is Ray Beams. And you see she shoots lasers with her mech. Oh God, I just put that together.
Or is it supposed to be a reference to Ray-Ban sunglasses?
No, it's. I don't know. Like, the Ray Charles reference is obvious, but I don't know where the beams comes from.
Because Charles does introduce himself by... actually, that is a good detail. Charles introduces himself by his full name. Charles Beams.
Yes.
Renton does not mention his last name, right?
Mm-hmm. And Charles does say, I feel like I've heard the name Renton before. It's probably nothing, though.
Right. Never seen a movie called Train Spotting?
And of course, we the audience already know that Charles was part of the Dewey Adrock inner circle bit. So, laying a little ground there. It's also worth pointing out that he seems to recognize the Gekkostate cog on Renton's board, but he doesn't do anything about it. He does notice, he does keep his eye on it, though. We do cut away from this briefly, though, to go back to the Gekkostate, where Eureka and Gidget are having a nice scene. They're sharing Snickers bars.
Okay, no, wait. There is something weird going on at the Gekkostate food store.
I think I know what you're going to say.
Because in the previous episode, Gidget purchases a chocolate bar of the brand chocolate bar.
Yes, in the previous episode, she purchases exactly the same bar, but it says chocolate bar on it.
Yeah.
And she's like, hey, Renton, you're not being yourself. Have a chocolate bar. And then in this episode, she produces a similar but different chocolate bar that does not say chocolate bar, but Snickers.
No, it says Smickers.
Or Smickers, right.
Look,
so
for all we know,
is there some kind of like counterfeiting thing going on here?
I hate to break it to you, but the most likely explanation is that they outsourced these episodes to 2 different studios.
No, it's just
that can't possibly be it.
No,
Clearly, they are dealing with like illegally smuggled counterfeit chocolate bars, and Gidget somehow mixed these up.
Are you saying there's a Smickers conspiracy?
Yes.
The Gekkostate's logistics lines are inconsistent. They have to resupply at different ports all the time. So
right.
Maybe,
sometimes they can go to Walmart and buy the real product, and sometimes they have to go to Aldi and get the shitty knockoff.
Yeah.
Sometimes they're getting real Smickers bars, and sometimes they're getting chocolate bar.
Yes,
exactly. But I do actually. I mean, I think we probably all really kind of like this sequence, right? It's kind of it's a great little bit here. It fleshes out Gidget in some really fun ways. Yeah. Like, I mean, it's not like there's like a well of pathos to Gidget, but I think.
She just likes men who are pathetic.
Yeah, I think it's really funny that she establishes that even she knows Doggy is a sympathy lie. But
yes,
but also I think it gives more sort of color to her sort of goofy personality. Like it doesn't make her less goofy, but it does establish that she has some depth behind it right there.
Yeah, and she wants to be friends with Eureka, and she wants to make the effort, right? Like,
yeah, absolutely,
because they are probably the 2 like women on this ship that are closer in age, right? Like everybody else is some variation of an adult, right? And so I do like it, right? It's like it is Gidget like genuinely extending a hand of friendship to someone who I think up till now, right, has not really had anything like that, right? Like Eureka has had people she is close with, right? She's close with
the children,
Holland, right? With the children, right? There are
but she has responsibilities towards the children, right? They can be her friends,
right? They're not her friends, but she is emotionally attached, to them,
right? And kind of what Gidget is extending here is like what Talho and Hilda have, what Hap and Holland have, right? Like a friend, a peer, a comrade, right?
And, to her credit, Eureka doesn't really seem to understand the concept, but Gidget keeps prodding her at it, And this is the first time somebody tells her, hey, you're probably in love with Renton. And Eureka does not understand at all, of course, but there's a great line that finishes up this sequence, which is where she says, right now I'm scared of even looking at his face. And I think that's a really good summary of kind of like the attraction that they feel for each other, but also the difficulty that they feel, right? She's scared of looking at Renton because he inspires such alien feelings in her, right? I think that's the kind of emotional difficulty that anybody who's been in love for the first time can appreciate, right?
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, and I think, this isn't a scene which moves us forward in any way, but it's just a great little scene to sort of lay the ground for perhaps a new and different Eureka. She's clearly in a different place mentally and emotionally than she was when she hugged the wall for a while.
Yes. These are the scenes that like I know I'm a fucking broken record about this, right? But these are the scenes that like make me like bang the gong about like why I love
more
like, a full-length TV series, right? Like because I don't think a conversation like this gets to exist in the world where Eureka 7 is 26 episodes, right?
No,
like,
of course not. Yeah.
There's just no time for like little moments like this to happen.
Yeah. So we come back to Renton and Charles and Ray. It's not specified in the dialogue of this episode, but I'll mention it anyway. Their ship is called the Swan. I think we do learn that eventually, but it's not a spoiler to say the
also
ship is
like kind of looks like not identical, but maybe the same make and model, or as the Gekkostate. It kind of has that like look.
That's the only ship you can get outside of the legal circuit.
I think the implication is that it's much smaller because we see in a little bit we see Charles launch his spearhead from the ship, and it takes up a considerable portion of the ship.
Well, more notably, they don't have a crew. It is just Ray and Charles. Right?
But I think, again, this is a really important scene, because what we see is that Ray and Charles are, a married, grown-up couple who have an elegant, sophisticated, well put together living space. And it's such a contrast between the sloppiness, the slobbishness, the sort of perpetual adolescence of the Gekkostate's living style. Charles and Ray are elegant and classy. They dress nice. They have a candelabra and a chandelier.
Right. But they're also like approachable and friendly, right? It is in many ways like it's. I mean, it doesn't take a genius to know that in many ways, right? It is almost like too good to be true, right? But I think like in this place that Renton is in, like in many ways, he could not have met better people than Ray and Charles in his current place, right? Like
that's the thing, right? Like, I mean, the ending of this episode basically confirms that even if Ray and Charles may not be the best examples, they are what Renton needs right now.
And I mean, this is where we get the important scene where Charles says, kids can be kids. We don't want you to be an adult. We want you to embrace your what's left of your childhood. We will worry about the grown-up stuff. We will handle the grown-up stuff. And, you can argue whether that's a responsible message to send, but clearly it is a message that is incredibly attractive to Renton's current mental state, right?
I mean, it's two adults who are willing to at least posture and present themselves as willing to take on the responsibilities of being adults, and understanding that like children have their own set of like issues and problems and responsibilities, and that because in many ways, right, the Gekkostate being kind of a pseudo like paramilitary operation, there is a sense that like, look, if you're on this ship, unless you're like really young, like Eureka's kids, you kind of have a responsibility, right? You have to do your part. Right, you have to do a job, right? Whether it's running the store or whatever it is, right? Like if you earn your keep on the Gekkostate, there's a conditional. You must like prove you deserve to be here, versus the unconditional like kind of parental love that Ray and Charles are giving to Renton, which is like, look, you're a kid, like. We're not going to ask anything of you. Just stay here as long as you feel comfortable.
Eat our food, hang out. And again, just the overwhelming, like, cool uncle energy of Charles showing off his wall of ref boards and
his wall of boards.
And then, bragging about how, I don't follow the trends of what the kids are doing. I go my own way.
That's such a good scene, though, where Renton is like, but in Rayout, they say that you only, like, real riders only use boards. And Charles is like, I don't listen.
Whatever.
I don't listen to that, to the current mainstream trends. And Renton is like, what? Rayout is mainstream? I thought I was the cool guy because I read it. Like,
again, it's just such a different kind of masculinity of sort of, what's the word,
he's that positive male role model that boys need, that everyone is talking about all the time. Like
he is just so much friendlier and more approachable than all of the other male role models that
like you joke Aqua, but in many ways, right, it's at least Charles as presented here is like he is masculine but also warm. Like he is emotional, like he is like receptive and understanding of like Renton's needs. Like it's
whereas Holland is like toxic masculinity incarnate, right?
Yes, basically, right. And I mean, I'm fucking locked in for like the next few podcasts as long as Ray and Charles are on screen, because like there's so much to be said about like
they
Ray
are
and Charles
fascinating characters.
You always have an excuse, right? First it's Anemone, then it's Ray and Charles. Don't forget, you're here forever.
If it's evil women, then it's evil women, and
first it's evil women, then it's like father figures. Do you have like? Is this your therapy, G?
Dude, like you don't even know like the thing like. There are things about where this art goes that I absolutely must be on the podcast to talk about, because I need to give you the play-by-play of like how child me went through the Ray and Charles arc, and like the ways in which this really
it goes some places.
Really affected me.
But
yes,
yeah, I mean,
but for now,
again, it is, and the hand of Providence intervenes here as well, because Charles and Ray are suddenly thrown into a job, but it's an altruistic job. They're going to
yes,
they're going to save a downed freighter. They're going to rescue them from the pirates.
We're going to be good mercenaries.
You know, we are, and like this is so lucky, right, or so unlucky, depending on. But like because it is such a perfect contrast between what we have just seen of the Gekkostate through Renton's eyes, right? Morally grey, or outright murderers who only do jobs for money, versus Charles coming in like this avenging knight to protect this downed freighter. And
cool swashbuckling,
they're probably smuggling some stuff, but we're not going to dob them in because we're cool dudes. We just want to rescue them, and like,
I'm just gonna grab my shotgun and get out of the cockpit to finish the guy off.
Firstly,
myself.
It's a bolt action rifle. Secondly, that might be the biggest dick move in anime history. Like,
it's like in many ways, it's. I mean, we could talk about the sequence, right? Where so basically, Charles shows Renton his cool robot. Renton likes the cool robot. Suddenly, we have an excuse to take the cool robot out for a spin. Where we see that
it's very cool.
Also, Charles, once again, kills the fuck out of these dudes, right? 2 episodes after Renton's upsetting realization about what it means to pilot an LFO, we watch Charles do that. He is unequivocally killing these dudes with his cool ass sick arm blades.
But you see, Renton was wrong all the time. It was the toxicity of the Gekkostate making him feel guilt, but the truth is that killing is cool and based, actually.
I mean, yes.
It's a good sequence. There's an Atano circus. I love the end of the fight where, Charles's spearhead just,
pile drives this mech.
Yeah, pile drives that mech into the ground. It's so
there's
good.
There's a very big game Hunter vibe here, right? Of him smashing the mech into the ground and then finishing it off with a shot to the head and stuff like that.
Very Craven the Hunter code.
Very very strong vibes of Chirico from Votoms, right? Getting out of the cockpit to finish the job. And in some ways, I actually really like this as a contrast because to be clear, right, Charles is still killing people, but also the way he kills the last pilot is in some ways sort of sick and personal in the same way Renton killed the last pilot, the last time he piloted the Nervosh, but because the way Charles does it is just a clean kill through the cockpit with the gun. Once again, you don't see it, right?
And we as the audience recognize that this is perhaps a troubling sign that Charles is so willing to personally take the kill shot in a very personal way. But
he's thrilled by it.
But Renton is infected by that same thrill, right? And because he believes they're fighting for a righteous cause. The truth, of course, is that this is just a mercenary job like any other. But because Charles does not make a big deal of it, Renton does not make a big deal of it. And again, this is such a glamorous portrayal of traditional masculinity that it's very easy to see how a confused boy might be seduced by this overwhelmingly, strong, powerful figure who is, beating the bad guys and going up close and personal, no fear, no regret, nothing. It's very seductive.
Totally. Yeah, it's all again. It's such a powerful, almost toxic combination of traits, right? It really, in some ways, I have never interpreted Charles's behavior here as intentionally malicious. I don't think he is grooming Renton. This is just who Charles is. But whether intentional or not, in some ways, Renton never stood a chance when he met Charles.
And again, it's because he is in such a bad place, and Charles does represent. And let's say Ray as well. Ray, but Ray is a different sort of more maternal.
We get that sequence right with Right, because then we get the home-cooked meal that I'm sure is delicious, but I will again point out that they are serving what appears to be a hot dog on a tortilla.
Yeah, with lettuce.
Oh yeah.
Japan has a long history of crimes against hot dogs. So
look, hot dogs are shelf stable, you know, when you're flying around in the sky.
Right, but like obviously because to bring up Ray, right? Like this home cooked meal is meant to represent Ray. Again, Ray does not get as much screen time this episode. In many ways, Ray in general does not get quite as much screen time as Charles, of course. But Ray is presented as the maternalistic ideal, serving a home cooked meal for the boys. Right? She's got a beautiful salad. You got these hot dog tacos here.
But she can also kick ass when she wants.
She loves her.
She's got the She's got the glasses of wine set out right.
She loves her husband, and she'll defend their home.
Right? It's so like,
compared to the complete disaster that Renton has left behind, and I think that the key thing here, and one of the really strong storytelling choices, is that we, the audience, have already seen that Ray and Charles are actually ruthless mercenaries. That we know that they are very charismatic people who are not necessarily, evil incarnate, but we have seen that they are dangerous and deadly people, and so
and not only that, but they're opportunistic, and they only take the job because it's to kill Holland. So they are also driven by a grudge, right?
And so obviously these sequences are much more powerful because we as an audience have the dramatic irony of knowing that actually by embracing this new life and rejecting his old life, Renton is endangering them in more ways than just the metaphorical, right? He is literally rejecting his old life because there's a very high chance that this might lead to them being killed.
I mean, even if there is still we as the audience know that Charles and Ray will sort of be a bad influence on Renton, or that at least he should not idolize them the way he does now. But on the other hand, the show still does a very good job at showing just how genuine they are. Like, you cannot hate these characters even though they are very obviously antagonists.
Right, there is no... There might be a slight ulterior motive, but certainly not a major one to them taking him in, to pulling this kid off the street, And Charles and Ray clearly love that he loves the stuff they're doing. You look at Charles when Renton is gawking out over the spearhead, and he's loving it. He doesn't answer the question about where the board is because he would rather do the goofy thing and just reveal it while they're in flight, which is just a completely unnecessary flourish, but the kind of thing you would do if you were trying to make this kid like you, right?
It's the kind of thing you would do if you dress in bell bottoms and an open silk blouse.
Hey, he is rocking it, man. He looks great.
He is. No, I love Ray Charles so much.
I like how Charles, most of the characters in the show look somewhat futuristic, and then there's Charles, who's just a guy in a shirt.
Like I said, in many ways, they are the characters which most align with the sort of theme of 60s counterculture which has run through the show. They look like 60s characters, and they have the philosophy of kind of more militaristic hippies in an almost certain sense,
like this kind of joyful nihilism, right?
Absolutely.
Nothing matters, and so everything is cool.
Absolutely. And the real strength of this episode is that it's so easy to see why Renton falls in with them immediately, right?
I think he even says at the end of the episode, right? This is the first time in ages he has felt at peace, right? He feels like it's a little goofy. He's crying over how good these hot dog tacos are, but in some ways, it is a catharsis for him, right? After all the just insane, nasty, toxic stuff he has gone through over the course of joining the Gekkostate, right? This is the first oasis he has found in 22 episodes.
I am happy that he is happy, when he starts doing his weird fist pump head bob and he smiles and blushes, I wasn't kidding when I said it was Moe. I really love that he is happy in that moment, and
we want to protect that smile at all costs.
Charles and Ray beams are about protecting the smiles of children there. And I'm sure nothing will ever go wrong with that mission.
Well, we get one last stinger here, though, which is we're reminded that all these episodes later, Dominic still kind of doesn't know how to read a map.
But he has eventually done the thing which he said he was going to do way back in the clip show episode, which is investigate what happened in Bell Forest. And he has arrived in Bell Forest, and the garage Thurston is still wrecked and abandoned.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And an eventful couple of episodes again. I mean, they're all eventful from this point onwards, but like
that's what I'm realizing. Like as a quote unquote guest on this podcast. God damn it, we are now fully into just everything matters in Eureka.
Everything happens so much all the time there. I mean, I think this is.
I love that movie.
I think this is a really, really good example of how the show is able to organically sort of not necessarily wrap up a plot line, but seamlessly shift in a new direction. You know, like now we basically have parallel plot lines running. You know, we have the Gekkostate side of the story, and we have the Renton side of the story. And, you know, will the twain be...
You never quite get what you think you're going to get, right? Every episode is a logical continuation of the last one, but never in a direction you think it's going to
go.
And
I think that's the mark of some really good writing, right? You never expect what's going to happen, but you can look back and easily see how you got there, you know. This show's good, it turns out. Really good.
Yeah, it turns out. It's a pretty good show.
And finally, all of our characters are happy, where they will stay all along till the end of this show.
Yeah, as if we don't have another 30 episodes left of this show.
Indeed. Any final thoughts from anybody before we wrap up here?
The one I will have that I will probably more fully formed talk about probably in the next string of episodes, or maybe even the ones after that, is... I watched Eureka 7 before I had watched Mobile Suit Gundam. And I'll just say that watching Mobile Suit Gundam and the arc in which Amuro leaves the white base and then notably meets one Ramba Ral did make me go, oh, that's what the Ray and Charles arc is in Eureka 7.
Yes, but also like, they take it in a very different direction, right?
No, and to be clear, I am not saying that it is emulating, but more like, oh, this is the inspirational base for it, right? I mean, Charles is an older ace pilot who pilots a blue custom, LFO. Just
no, I mean, like,
we'll see how that goes.
Again, you know, the Gundam influence in this show makes a lot of sense. Aside from the fact that obviously Gundam is influential on all robot anime that followed, many of these people directly worked on Gundam shows. So I think a lot of those tropes are bound to pop up as we go. You were going to say, Aqua?
I'm just looking forward to the conclusion of the story arc that they've been building up to for these couple of episodes, namely the underwear shortage at Gekkostate.
Yes, there are a few weird...
like the silk underwear. Matthew ordered the wrong size. Gidget's bra has gone missing because it was in Doggy's backpack, and now Renton took it. And their guy who procures all of their stuff is gone. So how are they going to get fresh underwear? Don't
forget the bit where Gidget brought clean underwear to Eureka so she could look good in her hospital.
Yeah.
I thought that Mathieu talking about his silk underwear was a is he actually listening to me bit at first, but when he just keeps going on about it, I'm like, wait, is he just talking about something which he's actually serious about? It's a mystery for sure.
He just likes being comfortable. He likes to treat his weapons with care.
Yes. You'll have to wait a dozen episodes for the payoff on the Matthew silk underwear arc.
Yes, one of the key stories running throughout the show there. With that, we are at the end of another installment of Blue Mondays. It falls to me to say thank you, Aqua.
Thank you.
Thank you, G.
Always good to be on.
And thank you all for listening. If you like the podcast, please leave us a comment, leave us a like. You know, you can subscribe to the podcast on Apple Music, Spotify, Amazon Music, Podbean, Stitcher, on YouTube, of course. And until next time, we'll see you later.